Hello, my name is Huck McClaran, and I chose to do my research on the way indigeneity is viewed and treated in the United States. Exploring the role of race within the American classroom, I find factors contributing to the erasure and adaptation of Native American history and culture. The transformation and removal of this history is committed by white people in order to oppress indigenous people, making them conform to an ideal white image. In this research, I pose the question, how can curriculum and awareness in the American classroom be improved in order to promote inclusivity and raise community understanding of Indigenous presence and importance? The fundamental purpose for this research is to attempt to comprehend just one small part of many in a system that contributes to and perpetuates white supremacy. The research takes place in the United States, but is largely meant to educate people in whatever country that injustices like these are occurring in. The history, traditions, and people of different North American tribes is undoubtedly manipulated by the oppressive system that was built to benefit essentially white men and white men only. I can't help but feel like these actions are caused by the desire to sustain a heroic and ethical image of the United States, which is also far from accurate. I believe that classrooms are one of the initial and significant sources for information that American children receive. If a child's parents or community does not provide a racially inclusive mindset and education, school may be the last opportunity that these kids get to gain a working knowledge of Indigenous people and their surroundings. Overall, schools and teachers from many parts of this country have only considered revisions in problematic curriculum within the past few years, if any revision at all. While attempting to remain unbiased for the duration of this research, I partially used the misinformation and appropriation of Native people that I was fed in my early years of school. Of course, now I recognize that what I was taught is a gross simplification of the truth. So I want to replace my false understandings, my previous understandings, with accurate history and an admiration for diversity. While doing this research, I occasionally ran into feelings of opposition from others while undergoing this project. Many of the claims for not changing textbooks or curriculum, for example, were very weakly based on the idea that people should shield their kids from the horrors of the world. I wanted to keep in mind that if Black and Brown and Asian children first-handedly experience racism, white children of any age are old enough to learn about it. For the context, children gain a lot of influence on their lives through ancestral knowledge, as I mentioned earlier. However, kids will for the most part agree with what a teacher says and act or do what teachers subconsciously promote. Genealogical knowledge plays a huge role in how white kids view Native Americans and if Indigenous children are aware and proud of their ethnicity. People, specifically in this case educators, are oftentimes too afraid to talk about race as if race is a bad or a taboo subject. Children should have the opportunity to celebrate their differences instead of growing up thinking their ethnicity is something to be hidden or deemed too inappropriate for a classroom setting or in life in general. For my analysis, I solidified my questions and research by examining the experiments based on interviews performed for educators and pre-educators. The interviews from a particular study clearly show the problems with the way schools train their teachers and the way teachers treat their students. They felt really uncomfortable talking about race in the first place. I also considered a study done in Arizona about textbook reform, which did include the rest of the United States. For a long time, textbooks in schools have heavily misinterpreted and erased Native history. As recently as 2018, racist imagery and ideas in textbooks were presented to American students. Here are just a couple of examples from textbooks that promote white superiority. Here's an actual question from a test given to a student. The correct answer they were looking for was children became civilized. And to the right, there is a depiction of a Native American girl with deemed acceptable clothes and hair. This clearly just actively is stripping Indigenous people of their rich culture. The outcomes, I found that there's no single cause, nor is there any single solution to solving racism and oppression against Indigenous people. However, small steps in schools, such as land acknowledgement and teachers simply being open to the conversation of race, can influence new generations to understand Native history and appreciate social and spatial justice. Textbook reform will take place through a huge revision of academic services and collaboration between educators, tribal members, politicians, community members, and others as well. A bill that was passed in 2005 and revised in 2015 now requires Washington State to teach the since time immemorial curriculum in public schools. The curriculum strives to provide educators with more accurate depictions of Native history. Simple guides for teachers make understanding privilege in an academic setting really simple. And the curriculum and organization have literal handbooks that help train teachers on correct language and inclusive practices within the classroom. One of the outcomes are the many workshops held by tribes and local civic groups to help people re-examine their own biases, their behaviors, and their language that adversely affect people of color and Indigenous people. Promoting these inclusive practices and historical accuracy is so vital for creating a progressive and not just not racist area, but an anti-racist environment. Overall, people are misinformed. However, much of what people learn in school about Native culture and history is not simply misinformation, but is actually powerful techniques that dictate behavior, disproportionately affecting people and groups of color. Tolerance to diversity was often looked up to in the past, but tolerance to me is not enough. The idea implies a racial hierarchy and fails to celebrate our differences as human beings. Some states seem like they are on the right track to becoming anti-racist and fully inclusive. That being said, there's an incredible amount of work that needs to be done in many places. Languages, ideas, textbooks that support white supremacy in one way or another are not simply outdated. They were never dated or justified to begin with. Racism is also not a new issue for people by any means whatsoever. People are just starting to gain the confidence to speak out against it. Here is one last picture, one last screen grab from the Washington State Office Superintendent of Public Instructions. This is just a small part of the many guides that they have in order to promote inclusivity. That includes my presentation. Thank you so much.